Everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this Bible from the Beginning class. Let's start off with a word of prayer because that's the thing I like to do. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Heavenly God, source of all goodness, fount of all wisdom, we thank you for drawing us together today in celebration of all that is good and all that is right. We thank you for drawing us together today in the celebration of our endeavors to make good things in your name. We ask that you bless us in our understanding and in our ignorance. We ask that you bless our ears that we might hear your wisdom, and our lips that we might speak your praise and truth. This we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
To open up, I'd just like to give you guys a chance to check in with each other a little bit. On your study sheet, you'll see there's a list of short, small group questions. You grab, between 2 and 4 people. If there's people you don't know, that's great. If it's people you do know, that's fine. But maybe grab some people and have a little quick chat about those. What I have 3 questions at the time. So, tell me a little bit about what you guys had in your discussion. What is scripture to you? What was said? You don't have to admit that you were the one that said it. You can pretend that it was somebody else in your group if you want to. You use the word comfort. Scripture to you is comfort. Okay, great.
Word to live by.
Word to live by. Okay, great, awesome. Other people, how do you respond to the question? God's holy word. Okay, great, awesome.
I wouldn't hear one, but I would say history.
It's a history. Okay, does that mean it's a factual history?
I don't know.
So I know something about Sandy that you may not know. Sandy has a passion for French.
What?
Sandy has a passion for French, the language.
Yeah.
She said, I don't know, right? It's also very French. One of the things that I love about the French language is that the word for history is the same word as just the word for story. Histoire. There's no difference between history like you would read in a book and history like you would tell around a campfire. And I actually find that to be a really useful insight into like the biblical worldview is not French, but I actually think that that's useful because it loosens my assumptions about what history might be, right? Which if I just let it be, I think of it as a dry list of facts rather than the story of our people that forms us, right? So anyway,
just playing off that fact, don't you think in years and decades to come, some of the history that we're living in now will be story as opposed to fact?
I don't know that I actually believe it. I believe in facts, but I don't know that we only ever have the story as it's recorded.
Yeah.
Right? We never know what happened. All we know is what we think happened, right? So anyway, but yes, so that's helpful. Okay, great. What have you been told about the Bible?
We've been told a lot about the Bible, haven't we?
Mainly by me.
We've been told a lot that the Bible is true, that it's not true, that the Bible is a historical book, that it's a fiction. We've been told that there are eyewitness accounts. We've been told that there aren't any eyewitnesses. We've been told that there have been lots of different authors. Some of the books are named by authors, and some people say those authors are not the actual true author. We've been told that there are priestly versions of verses and more layman type verses of verses.
Wow, I've never even heard that. That's interesting. Okay, great.
So there are lots of different interpretations of the Bible.
You've heard contradicting things about the Bible. Okay,
From both secular and people.
From both secular and religious sources. Great.
Especially in the Gospels, the Gospels he saw it that way and he heard it that way, and they're not.
Isn't it interesting that in the New Testament, where story of Jesus, which is like the most important story, I think, for Christians, I don't think that that's a dangerous thing to say. But we have four different accounts, right, that sit next to each other, and sometimes they match and sometimes they don't, right? We have four different witnesses to the gospel story. And I always find that personally interesting. Okay, so you point out that there is discrepancies even within the Bible itself. That's something that you've heard. Okay, great. Or you've been taught. I guess one of the things I'm looking for too is like, what were you taught about the Bible or about creation as a kid? Like, what did you grow up with? And I realize that there'll be different answers in this room, right? Because we didn't all have the same growing up, right? But in the room in general, like, what has been your experience with how it was explained to you that the world was created, or what the Bible is supposed to be like when you were a kid?
Let me tell you something. This is very kind of personal. So I have always loved science, even as a little boy. I wanted to be a scientist when I was a little boy, and lo and behold, I'm a scientist now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking to my dad about dinosaurs, and my dad, who was not an educated person, graduated from high school, essentially looked at the Bible as, the Word, and it was the truth, and said, Michael, there are no dinosaurs. They didn't talk about dinosaurs in the Bible.
Mm. So you felt personally like this pull against two sides of yourself, right? Your father, who said the Bible tells you how the world was made,
Right.
and your scientific training, which has led you to believe in other things.
Right.
And there's a tension there.
A dichotomy.
Yeah. A dichotomy, a tension, and sometimes maybe it's difficult to know what to make of that tension.
Yeah, especially when you're a little kid and you're reading about dinosaurs and science, and you go home and your dad's like, "Oh, they're the dinosaurs."
So even as a kid, you had a sense that there was a family fight that you didn't understand. That was in this.
I wouldn't use that.
Okay.
Like to say that there was a disconnect.
Disconnect. Okay, great. That's helpful. Great. Other people, what did you learn about the Bible growing up, or about creation growing up?
I think he brings up a great point in that you learn atoms and this and that in school, and then you've got God breathing life into the world. And
It's difficult to know what to make of what,
Yeah.
because you feel like you have different stories about where we came from.
People always just say, you need to read the Bible. Need to read the Bible. Okay.
Do you get the sense that those people have read the Bible?
Turn the page and you start reading the Bible. And I'm lost after about 3 or 4 lines. Yeah, I'm thinking.
That's pretty cool.
So your experience of the Bible is you read it and you get lost.
I can't read it.
Great. I think I might help you understand at least why that happens
I
today.
can't read it.
I think I might be able to help you understand why that happens. Great. Other things about, so I guess I just want to throw out, sometimes people were raised with a really strong, like, the Bible is literally true, and if you don't believe everything in the Bible, everything else will fall apart.
Right.
Other people are raised with something that's looser, like the Bible is this collection of stories of our people, and it is the deepest well of wisdom that we have. And going through the stories of the Bible draws us closer to God and what matters in the world, right? But so I just like to name the fact that sometimes talking about the Bible is actually really difficult, because there tends to be a lot of pressure to make sure that you get it right, or that you believe that it's right. I want to invite you guys to let go of all of that today the best you can. And part of that is because I have an approach to learning the Bible that I think it's been really meaningful to me, but may not be, it might be seen as uncommon in this part of the country. And that is, a lot of places will focus on how the Bible, like the things that are the same in all of the different parts of the Bible, the conversions of the Bible, right? Just pay attention to the similarities, not the differences. Many of you may have actually heard that. in Bible studies. For me and for a lot of the Episcopal tradition and biblical tradition itself, right? Like even the earliest Christians didn't actually read the Bible. They were very aware that there was inconsistencies, and they were happy to look at the differences and see what they had to say to them. So what I'm trying to explain to you is I have a tendency to look more at the divergence within Bible stories rather than convergence, because you get to sense a different thing. Sissy was talking a little bit about the 4 stories of the gospel, right? If you try to find the things that are similar, that might be beautiful, but you'll never understand what's unique about what Matthew has to say about Jesus. And you'll never find what's unique about what Luke has to say about Jesus. And when you start looking at the differences, you begin to understand not just the writing or the teaching, but the author and how Jesus has made an impact on the author. And then you can start to have different roads into your own soul and how Jesus can reach you. Now, obviously, this is not a Bible study about the gospel, right? It's a story about the Old Testament, about the creation stories. And when I was encouraging you all to join us this morning, one of the things I told you in church is I said, there are 2 different creation stories in the Bible. And I said, that might be surprising to some people to hear. But there are, and we'll get into the details. I guess one of the other things I want to get, just to get a sense of the room, and this is not good or bad or whatever, but when you heard that, if you heard that recently when that's been said, I'm just wondering how many of you were surprised to find that there's 2 different stories of creation. Okay, great. So about 2/3 of the room, right? Well, you are not crazy. No, there are 2 different stories. In fact, many published versions of the Bible actually have like a rubric in the middle that says another account of creation, right? So there are 2 different stories, right? So once again, like in terms of this journey, I encourage you to sort of let go of how you want the end to be, and sort of go along with the journey. And I'll be honest with you, I realize that that's a big ask for many people, and in fact, it's a big ask for me most of the time. My wife loves this one style movie that I can't stand. She loves. Anybody ever seen Wes Anderson movies?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Wes Anderson movies are like, I don't even know how to describe it. They're really weird, and some people love them, and I can't stand it because the whole time I'm like, what does this mean? And I literally like.
If I had to sum it up, I'd say they're almost like a caricature of a story that someone told before.
Yeah, it's really like so. And anyway, so like I'll be watching this with my wife, and she loves these movies, and I'll literally be like, "You like this?" And she'll be like, "Yeah," and I'll be like, "Well, what do you like about it?" And she's like, "It's funny," and I'm like, "Well, how do you know when it's funny?" And she says, "I'm laughing." See, she has this ability to be in this moment through the journey and not worry about like how it all fits together in the end. And I am the kind of person who wants to know, like, if I don't understand the forest, it's difficult for me to understand the trees. In studying the creation stories, I want to encourage you to spend some time with each tree today. And then afterwards, we'll worry about how the forest comes together. Does that make sense? Okay, great. So, all right. So, like I said, there's 2 different creation stories, but me saying that to you for at least 2/3 of you, might be like, what is this crazy pastor, right? I also want to point out, every pastor you've ever known in seminary was taught there's 2 different creation stories. So, maybe I'm the first one to like admit it to your face, but it's consensus in almost all scholarly community. Like it's not a fringe opinion, right? I have a lot of a fringe opinion If ever you talk to me, you probably figure that out. But this is not one of those French opinions, okay? All right, so I just wanted to, and in fact, even in your handout, I actually put a picture of an Onion article. You guys may or may not know what the Onion is. It's fake. It's legitimate. It was fake news before fake news was a thing, right? It's a parody newspaper, and the headline of the story is "Inconsistencies Found in Bible," right? Because it's something, and that's funny because we all know that there are. But oftentimes we treat it as if there's none. But today I want us to actually have some fun with the inconsistencies and see if it leads us somewhere more graceful and more understanding about about who God is and who we are, which really is what creation stories are about. They're about understanding who God is and who we are. Okay, great. So let's start off with the actual text. If it's all right, I'll sort of read this text. Those of you who've been in a lot of my Bible studies are probably used to me pausing all the time and adding commentary. I tried to convince myself not to do that, but every time when I start reading, I can't resist it because I just love talking about the Bible. But if you've got your own Bible that you brought, I encourage you to read out of that. But I did include the text for anybody who didn't bring their own Bible. The reason why I encourage you to read out of your own Bible is if you want to make underlines, notes, stuff like that for yourself. I think that's actually a really great practice. But right now we're just going to be reading Genesis 1, straight through Genesis 4, 2a. When I say 4, 2a, that might sound weird to people. Sometimes scholars divide even between verses. Like if there's a whole verse and they only that might have two sentences, A would be the first half and B would be the second. So literally the reading that we're going to do cuts off in the middle of a verse, which means that if you put that together, you're realizing that I'm telling you that the first story of creation doesn't even end in a chapter. And nor does it even end in a verse. It ends in the middle of a verse. But when we read it, I think it'll become pretty obvious to you when we get there. Yeah.
What version is this? Which Bible is that?
The version that is in front of you, thank you, that's a great question, is the New Revised Standard Version of the Bible. There's lots of different translations out there, and there is a whole art of biblical translation that I can talk to you about. The New Revised Standard Version is, I often use the New Revised Standard Version for two reasons. One, it's the version that most Episcopal churches use in worship, by far. And two, if you, like when I went to a secular college, I went to William and Mary, and I took some religion classes, and you had to read the Bible. And my professor was like, okay, the Bible version we're going to start with is the New Revised Standard Version. So if you take a secular religion class, it's also, so it's both the version that your church has given you, and it's also the first version you would get if you went to a secular class. So for that reason, I feel like it's a pretty reputable translation, but there's a lot of different advantages and disadvantages, and scholars argue all day over one line, right? So anyway, I think it's a solid one, but there's other solid ones too. And if you want to find out more about biblical translations, just ask me, and I will try to keep it short. All right, so I'm just going to read this out loud. And for those of you that are reading in the copy, I put some things in bold. I put them in bold. There is no bold lettering in the original text of the Bible. But I put the things in bold because I want it to feel like, I feel like one of the things about this first story of creation is it feels like it's meant to be read as a story with a whole group of people. I don't want to pre-program you on it, but a lot of scholars believe it was actually written to be read liturgically. So it was actually written to be read back and forth like we do in church, right? That it is this sort of a little bit more grand that way. And I think that as we do this, it'll become clear. So if you see me sort of leading to you on the things that are repetitive, feel free to chime in and we can enjoy it together. Okay. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Pause. So, a couple things real quick. In theology, a lot of times they talk about God creating from nothing, but if you'll notice, there's not just nothing in this story when God starts creating. There's other things too. There's water, and there's a great wind that seems to come from God. Note in Hebrew, the same thing in Greek, by the way. Note the word in Hebrew for wind is ruach, which is the same word. It means wind, it means breath, and it means spirit. And the play off of that pun goes through all of the Bible, both in the Old Testament, which is written in Hebrew, and in the New Testament, which is written in Greek, because their language is the same. They have the same word for wind, breath, and spirit. So when we talk about the Holy Spirit, you could actually call it the Holy Breath, or you could call it the Holy Wind. So there is and that's just something to be aware of. I knew a priest that whenever she would baptize people, she would get down at the baptismal font and she would blow 3 times. She would go on the water as a callback to this very moment of creation, this sense of the wind, right? Okay, great. So, darkness, unpause. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, right? Pause. I want to point out that how does God go about creating this?
Say that again.
How does God go about creating in the story? He speaks it. Just his word makes it happen, right? That's that seems really powerful, right? Someone who doesn't have to actually man, yes, it is the original Alexa, right? So you just say it and it happens. Okay, great. Unpause. Okay. And God separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day and the darkness night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Pause. So one of the first things God is doing is ordering what's there, right? There's sort of chaotic stuff, and God is bringing the order. Unpause. And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made a dome, and it separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. Oh. For those of you who had for science in elementary school, this might seem confusing, but it's worth knowing that the way that the ancients thought about the universe was that there was water on the earth, and then there's the sky, right? But what color is the sky? Blue. And what color is water? So if you didn't have someone who had gone up in a spaceship, you would naturally see what's on the other side of that big dome. Water. And in fact, even more so, where does the rain come from? The sky, right? There's actually a part in the story of Noah where it talks about God opening up the windows in heaven. Why? Because if there's water there and it leaks, that's where the rain happens. Once again, this is a very different way of looking at the world, right? But if you haven't been through science class or whatever, this is just the natural assumptions you would make. So I'm trying to help you live in the world of the story and the hero, right? Does that make sense? So in the world of the story, there's water up and there's water down, and there's this dome we call sky that keeps them separate. And so God called the dome sky. And there was evening, and there was morning. The second day. Okay, great. So you notice that each day God is doing discrete things. This is like, if creation was lunch, this one would be in a bento box, right? It's all very ordered, right? and it's going to get even worse. And then God said, let the waters under the sky be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. Pause. So now he's talking about land, right? And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, or in Hebrew, Adamah. We'll get back to that. Called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Great. Then God said, let us put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it. And so it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed of every kind, trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day, right? So you sort of get how like this is like expand, like the thing is start small and it's growing big, and it's all based on this like God's intentional movement, plan, or voice, right? Okay, great. And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let there be signs for the seasons and for days and years, and let there be lights in the dome of the sky to give light on the earth." Right? And so God made the two great lights: the greater light to rule the day, the sun, and the lesser light to rule the night, the moon and stars, right? And the star, and it says, or the moon, and then it says, and the stars. And God set the dome in the sky to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and night. Rule over the day and night. And to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning. The fourth day. Okay? Once again, it's like the rhythm of the story is actually, I think, part of the story, right? And you can almost imagine like some crazy old rabbi, right, around a fireplace, around a fire, right, being like the fourth day, right? Because and it's showing the wonders of creation bit by bit. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. Let the birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky." And so God created a great sea monster, every living creature that moves, of every kind with which the waters swarm, and every winged bird of every kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning. The fifth day. Right? So now we're starting to get animals, birds. So we've got vegetable, we got plants, and then birds, and we're starting to build up, right? It seems like smaller kinds of I don't want to have my own judgment, but it seems like smaller things in creation are growing and getting expanding, more complex and more interesting, right? So it's building from something small to something big. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle, creeping things, and wild animals." I love the creeping. "Wild animals of the earth of every kind." And it was so. And God made the wild animals of the earth of every kind, and cattle of every kind, and everything that creeps upon the ground of every kind. And God saw that it was. Okay, so now we're getting like real animals, from the bugs down to the cows, right? So you're beginning to see that they are sort of how they're ordering the world. There's the water, there's the land, there's the sky, the plants, there's the sky animals, there's the land animals. And then God said, okay, but right so far we haven't met a human being. So, and then we're going to go into that. So then God said, let us make humankind in our image. Pause. The R might be confusing for some people, right? Because it's plural, and most of us think of God as singular. Some Christian interpreters would be like, this is the Trinity. I just want to let you know that from the author and the hearer's perspective, it's different. So, like you might see the Trinity in that. I'm not telling you not to do that, but I want you to know the way that the original people reading the story would hear it. So, there's a convention that's not common in current English, but it's common in most languages, and it is common in Old English. If you met the Queen of England, would she say, "I believe something"? No.
No.
She would say, "We believe," right? Because royalty would use the plural, right? So there's a royal plural tense in both Old English and almost all languages. That might be surprising to people who are used to contemporary English, but if you take French, it's the same thing, right? When you meet someone important, you would say you would refer to them using the French verb vous versus the French verb tu. And tu is the way you talk to your friends. Vous is the way you talk to the king, and vous is also the way you talk to a group of people. So the plural is also the formal, and the singular is the informal. By the way, if you ever come to the 8 o'clock service here, it's rite one, and you pray to God, and it's all thee and thy. In Old English, there is a plural formal, that's you and your, and there is an informal singular, and that's thee and thy. The people who wrote the prayer book wrote the Old English version. The thee and thy was designed to have us talk to God the way we talk to our best friend, or the way we talk to our lover, not the way we talk to the king. And it's funny because a lot of times people like that language because they think of it as more formal. But the language was chosen because it was more intimate. And I think that's interesting, personally. So, but in this instance, when he says in our image, it's the royal plural, at least the way that it was probably written and definitely heard. Okay, so let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the cattle and over the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So humans are being made and they're being given chance to take care of all the rest of this creation. And then it says, so God created humankind in his image. It probably is in the actual, it's probably their image, but they probably changed it for whatever reason. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So I point this out because many of you probably were raised with God created man in his image. But once again, in that language, man also was a word that was used to be both men and women. So in the context of the translation, it's a better translation to say that God created all humanity, the way we use, because nowadays when you don't, in like Old English or poetry, you might say every man is an island. Does that mean women aren't? No. It means every human being, right? We don't really use English that way, right? We don't often say man to mean all of humanity. But in the original language here, it is that way. So what I'm saying is the New Revised Standard Version is very clearly translated to try to make it clear that in the context of this creation story, women and men are not made in it's not like one is made and the other's made. They're made together and in God's image. It's not like God's image is male and then there's also women. In this place, when it says God's image, it's talking about all of humanity. Does that make sense? From a linguistic perspective. Creation story. Right? But in the context of this story, which, by the way, the language about, so she said, where did Adam's rib come from? And I said, the creation story too. But I'll also point out that the full language about the image of God does not exist in the second creation story. The only time we talk about humanity being created in the image of God is in the first creation story when human beings are created at the same time. Okay. That might seem like, and this is one of the reasons why separating them out might be helpful. But that I might be jumping ahead a little bit. So I just want to point out that at least in this story, human beings are created at the same time, and they're created in God's image. Okay? Am I freaking anybody out too bad?
What about Adam and Eve?
That's the second creation story,
Coming up.
right? The first creation story is God speaks things into existence. The second creation story is Adam and Eve. And the details don't match. We're going to get to the second creation story, but right now we're living in the first.
Who wrote this?
So we have, these stories are so old, we have no idea who actually wrote them down, much less who actually said them for the first time, right? Because the other thing is these stories are older than written language. So in some ways you can't even say who wrote them because they came out of a community telling stories around a fire. Now, scholars have theories about when different stories emerged, and we can get into that if you want to, but there's nothing in the text that tells you who wrote it. Now, there is a tradition that I don't put a lot of stock in personally. There is a tradition that Moses wrote all the first 5 books of the Bible. That's a larger conversation probably for another day if you want to get into it. But if he did, he was having some weird flashes because there's stories that don't match and they're right next to each other, which is what we're doing. So, the story itself doesn't tell us who wrote it. Okay, great. And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves upon the earth." And God said, "See, I have given you plant yielding seed upon the face of the earth, every tree and seed and its fruit. You shall have them for food, and the beasts of the earth, and to every bird in the air, and everything that creeps on the earth, and everything that has the breath of life," breath, wind, spirit, breath of life, "I have given green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was, nope, not good.
Not
Very good. So there's this call and response that's going through the whole thing, and now it changes to not just good, but very good here. Apparently the Hebrew itself actually means something more like forcefully good. Like good with goodness. So each thing is good, but when you put them together, it's more than the sum of its parts, right? That there's this forcefully goodness of how creation works together, of this grand plan, if you will, of creation coming together the way that God did it. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. That's interesting too. Like rest is part of this cycle of creation. And so God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created. So, and once again, that cuts off in the middle of a verse, but we'll figure out why that makes sense when we get to the second. Okay, so to review, I just put a list of factual questions, which I thought we would go through together. I could make you try to answer them on your own and then grade you, but I think I'll just talk you through them, right? So this is to like review the fact of the story, right? We're going to get into the meaning in just a minute, but first I want to get some facts straight. Okay, so factual question. It has been said by theologians, nothing, that there are things, but there are things before God starts creating in this story. What are the building blocks of creation according to this story? And I put 4 blanks. Does anybody want to give it a shot?
You got the wind.
the wind and the
Wind
And the water.
and the water.
And the spirit.
Wind and spirit are the same,
Right.
right? There's darkness and there's void.
And what?
Void. Which you might be able to say is nothing, right? But it's not just nothing. There's also darkness. God, you could say, creates the wind from his breath, but there's at least water, chaotic water everywhere that has to be separated and organized, right? How might you characterize this time? Is it the time before God starts creating? Is it ordered or chaotic?
Chaos.
It's chaos, right? And the whole theme of this story is God bringing order to chaos, it seems, right? Which we'll see in the next thing. God creates in this story by, Sarah said it earlier, speaking, right? So just by his, like, so much power, right, is in God's voice. First he creates light and then gives a light and dark names of day and night, right? So what you're beginning to see is this is a story of how things came to be, right? Things we already take for granted. And giving names to things itself brings, and there's a blank, and I would say order, right? You have a sense of order, like, oh, this is day, oh, this is night. You're separating, organizing, bento boxing the craziness which is created. God created a dome to separate the waters. That's the blank there. And what might the idea of having water overhead explain about the world in which we live? I don't know this here. We have water over us. That's probably what comes from. Rain, right? Okay. The world is separated into two kinds of spaces. Under the dome, blank, and the other blank. So sky, and then like the earth and land are the two. Living creatures are brought forth out of the earth and the sky. So they both come from the earth and the sky. Remember, like, we've got the plants, we've got the birds, we've got the animals. Oh, don't worry about this question. Sorry, I wrote that. I wrote part of this a while ago, and I was forgetting it. I said, why might the birds and the fish be created on the same day? Mainly because we're land animals. So, all right. So here comes a question I want you to remember too. Who was created first, humans or animals? Animals, right? And then so like it went up from creation to human being, the pentacle, right? The way that this story is told. Who was created first in the story, men or women? They were created at the same time. Who bears the image of God in the story? Both men and women. Okay, great. Most of the things that God created, he calls good. One thing he called very good. What was that?
Everything.
The creation of God together, right? Like this ecosystem of the world itself is good. All right. So now we have a series of discussion questions. Would you guys like to do that in a small group, or would you like to do it in one big group?
One group.
One group. Okay. All right. So why might that be that the creation thing together? Why might that be very good or forcefully good? What is better about the ecosystem, do you think? There's no right answer. This is not factual. This is discussion. What do you think?
Community, the complexity.
The community, the complexity, the interdependency. Maybe.
It's like putting a puzzle together. You've got to have more pieces. You got to have this fits here, and this completes it.
Yeah. I remember when I was a kid in science class, and I learned that trees breathe in what we breathe out, and we breathe in what trees breathe out. And I was like, whoa. I mean, that was mind-boggling, right? Because I don't really think of myself as being dependent on trees, but I am. I don't like to think about that because I'm an indoor cat. But this all of creation is in it together, and it's all created as one large thing, and that makes sense. God's ordering everything, right? Everything has its place. Name three adjectives that describe God in this passage, and we don't have to add just three, but like, if you had to describe the character of God in just this story, what adjectives would you use to describe omnipotent? Omnipotent, so all powerful, right? Okay, great.
I think
Omnipotent.
he's a creative God.
Creative, right? And not just like he sits back and he figures things out and then he makes them, right? So he's creative by himself. Okay, great. What creative, omnipotent, what else? Awesome, like big deal.
Proud. He also
Proud.
says this is good, and this is
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, he enjoys the creation that he's created, right? Cosmic, so beyond just what we see in the world. Orderly, that's the big thing I'm looking for, right? So everything has its purpose and everything's in its place in this story, right? God is the great engineer. If you're someone who likes things clean, this is the creation story for you. If you walked in this church this morning and you were like, those flowers are not what I want. Like this is, you're like, this worship space is not living up to my concept of God, right? Which puts things in its place and makes sure it's beautiful and works together, right? If you guys are into personality stuff, if you're a Myers-Briggs J, this is the story for you. J's like things orderly and set, and P's are perceiving they're okay with things being unfinished and all that sort of thing. So this is like very Myers-Briggs J personality of God. Figures out what's right, sets it right. Yeah. Okay, great. How
does he rest?
Why do you think that it's important that God rests?
I think to teach us to do so as well.
I mean, we definitely learn to do so. The passage seems to indicate, though, that we are doing that to imitate God rather than God's doing it because he knows we're gonna need it. But that doesn't, I mean, we do need it. But why do you think it matters that God rests?
You've got to build your strength back after using wet strength.
I mean, does God seem like he's lacking in strength in this passage?
I think he wanted a lot.
Well, that's a good.
I think
like
he wanted
that.
a lot.
Oh, I like
Let
that.
it bake, see what happens.
See, I feel like the seventh day is in itself a larger version of that every day when he says it was good. So God always takes time to enjoy the creation, to appreciate, to have. It's kind of weird to say God is grateful. I guess God is grateful to God, and the rest of us are just grateful to God. Everybody grateful is to God, right? So, but there is this time of reflection, thanksgiving, and appreciation, right? That seems baked in to the way the story works. And God functions that way. And if we're in the image of God, then we probably should probably function that way, right? I hope it didn't seem like I was quibbling a little bit, but I think sometimes when we get the theology, we start putting the cart before the horse on this kind of theology stuff, and then we're like, oh, God rested because he knew we would need it, but that makes it seem like rest is just something we do because we need it, and not like it has its own innate goodness, right? But the story has the rest, the appreciation, all of that stuff is part of the nature of God. It's not a thing that he creates. It's part of who God is. And because we're made in his image, it's part of who we are. So when you start talking about Sabbath and rest, one of the things that, if you ever get in a prayer class with me, I'll talk about rest isn't just about stopping working. It's about entering into the appreciation, reflection that God is giving all of creation, right? So it's not just I'm resting in the rest of God. That might seem weird, but that's like the spiritual interpretation of the way Sabbath actually works from a spiritual perspective. A lot of times that gets lost in American Protestantism when it's work, 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 and just rest as long as you can, as you absolutely have to, so that you can work better. Like most of the time, we sell rest as a way to become more productive, which tells you that the only thing we really care about is work. But that's not the way this story works. Right? This story actually values rest for its own reason.
I feel like you're exactly right. Like sometimes when you create something and then you sit back and look at it and go, you look at it and go, that's pretty good. Right?
And
Very good.
Very,
as forcefully good. Yeah, I mean, but like that becomes part of the creative process, right? Because the art isn't created just to be created and move on. The art is created in part to be enjoyed. Like that's part of the process.
Wouldn't it be made any changes? Well, I think I'm gonna move that bug over here.
That's a good question. In this story, does it talk about him making changes? No. Maybe in the next one.
Oh,
So, when might this image of God, the great engineer, the orderer, the creator with a plan, when might that image of God be particularly helpful, you think, for us in life?
It's helpful when I'm worshiping because it gives me something to focus on.
Okay, so when you're worshiping, you like to let go of yourself and just take in the awe,
Right.
right? Okay, great. So that transcendent experience of God is what theologians would call it, right? This appreciation of God's greatness, bigness, full, and all the way out there, right?
I like thinking that there is an order.
Me too.
You like thinking that there is an order. So when you feel disorder, maybe this vision is helpful because you're like, God is putting it into order because you like order, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is that it shows me that God is in complete control.
In this story, God is absolutely in complete control. And you like that thought because what? You feel out of control? And you like to think that somebody's in control. It might as well be me. Okay. Okay, great. It helps you let go of the fact that you want to that you might be tempted to take control of yourself because you keep control in the hands of the one that's qualified, God. Okay, great. Are there times in life that this concept of God on itself, like if you only had this way of thinking about God, are contexts in life when it might be limiting or might not be particularly helpful?
It doesn't help me understand the randomness, the disorder, and the toleration of the things that are allowed to go on.
Okay, so there's randomness, disorder, and chaos in the world. You're like, where did that come from? Maybe it just existed beforehand, and God hasn't gotten around to fixing it yet. But it really but your experience in the world might be that there's more disorder, chaos, and bad stuff. That this story even leads you to think that should be there. Is that fair?
It should be, you said.
Then this story alone would lead you to think that why is there evil? Like it doesn't seem to answer that. Is there evil in this story? Huh?
Not in this.
Not in this.
Oh, not in that.
Not in this story, right? In this story itself, it doesn't explain how anything went wrong ever, right? Like in my experience in the world, it's like things go wrong a lot, right? So this story, might help me get out of the narrow view that things are going wrong, but it doesn't help me understand where did wrongness come from? Where did evil, sin? There's nothing in there, right? About the terrible things that people do to each other, about the fact that people take off their shoes on airplanes. None of those things, right, are explained in this story, and that's what I will spend a lot of my life struggling with.
Well, they hadn't mentioned death.
There's no mention of death. So it also doesn't help you figure out what to do with death.
Next story.
Yeah.
Next story, right? So there seems like there's important spiritual things in life that this story itself wouldn't necessarily do for you. Is that fair? Right? But at the same time, we do see the truth in this story. We do see that God is omnipotent and has control and there is this God that we experience in worship at other times. Great awe, even though that doesn't necessarily explain all of the context of our experience in this world, but it's helpful, right, to understand God as the engineer, at least for a lot of things, and it helps us understand our place in the world, which is keeping the order together. A really strong argument can be made for Christian ecology out of this passage, right? Because what is forcefully good? The ecology itself, right? It's the relationship between the things that are better than the things independently. Does that make sense? Okay, great. I love that you guys like to talk. We've got all afternoon to do it. Great. Okay, so the second creation story, which we alluded to a little bit, is the story of Adam and Eve, right? So as we talked about the first story in the rubric as being the one where God speaks the world into being. And so God speaks the world into existence, and that's beautiful. So I'm going to take just a moment to get at this two stories of creation thing, because I realize that thank you for being along with the journey with me, but I want to try to show it to you. If you turn to page 5, it has the beginning of it has chapters 2 and 3 of Genesis in it. And if you notice in gray is the stuff that's at the very end of what I said was the first story of creation. So I'm just going to read this to you and see if you think this break, which was made up by scholars, like there is nothing on the page that tells us that this break happens, but see if you think that it makes more or less some sense to you. So Genesis 2. Thus the heavens and earth were finished in all their multitude. And the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because God rested from all the work he had done in creation. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the day the Lord made the earth and heavens, when no plant in the field was yet on the earth, and no herb on the field was yet sprung up. For the Lord had not caused it to rain upon the earth. There was no one to till the ground. So, do you see that there's like a disconnect there? Right? Like all of a sudden it feels like we're jumping in, because wait, we just created the whole world, and now we're right back to where there's no rain, and no people, and no things, right? So it is that like seeming disconnect that I think is a good check for me, right, against what like you might read in scholars, right? Like I can see right there that something has changed, right? And here's the thing, getting back to something that Martha said earlier that I thought was really insightful. When Martha was like, I read the Bible and I get confused. Because if you were just reading the Bible and you thought it was supposed to hang together, and there was nothing to mark that change, you might think you're nuts. Like, and you probably blame yourself, right? Because it's skipping all over the place, and you know you're lost, and it's the Bible, so it can't be wrong, and it can't be weird, so it's got to be me, right? As it turns out, if you do that, you'll never really get to know the Bible. You'll just get to know what people think you ought to think, or at least that's where I come. Getting back to this, like, I prefer divergent approaches rather than convergent approaches, because I think that when you have a convergent approach, you only look for the similarities, what you end up learning is that the Bible is what I want it to be. And I'll be honest with you, most days, I want a handbook. I want something that's going to give me instructions so I can get through the day. I want to do what's right, and I don't want to spend too much time thinking about what's right. Right? And if you notice, a lot of times the way the Bible is taught, especially to children, is very much like that. You might have heard people say the Bible is a handbook for life. But have you ever picked up a handbook? What does a handbook say? It says take screw A and put it into socket B. Does that sound like even the one story we read so far? No. It's not a list of instructions. It's not an instruction manual, which doesn't mean that you can't get instruction from it. It doesn't mean that you can't get wisdom and insight from it. But it's not designed to only tell you one thing, and it's not designed to only tell you one thing of doing, one way of doing things, if it's complex, which it is. So you can try to make the Bible into what you want to believe in, but then you'll never have a relationship with the actual Bible God has given you. And that's why I like the divergent approaches, which might seem weird to many, but because I don't want to just have a relationship with what I think the Bible should be, or what I want the Bible to be. I want to be able to have a relationship with the Bible and with the God of the Bible that's on the Bible's terms, not mine. Right? My terms want a clear narrative. But God hasn't given me that. And I can either think maybe God has wisdom in not giving me exactly what I think I should have, or not. But part of the reason why I want to go through this process is because I want you to be able to have a relationship with the Bible as it is God has given it to us. Because I think that it's really, because I actually think that's where the good stuff happens. Even though at first it might seem a little disconfusing, a little disconcerting, disorienting, and confusing. Does that make sense? Sort of understand. Okay, so chapters 2 and 3 are probably too long for me to just read through for you. Would you guys like to get in small groups and read through it together? Or would you like me to try to summarize and jump through? Summarize and jump through. Okay. So in that case, I have to put a really big disclaimer, and that is, please read the thing, right? Like, what I mean, and it'll make more sense if you read it the way that I've laid it out, right? But please actually read the thing, because it's very difficult to summarize the Bible without filling in the holes. And it's not bad to fill in the holes. That's what I do in every sermon, right? And I'm a big fan of my sermon. I'm not actually. But in some ways, when we fill in the holes, it's how we end up making meaning ourselves. But one of the things that I think is beautiful about the text is you'll think you understand everything, and you go back and find something that you think was there that isn't actually there, right? Or maybe it's a little bit different than you thought. Because you always assume that God made Adam in God's image. But it never says that. It says God made humanity in God's image. It does talk about Adam being made in a very different way than the first story. So right now I want to invite you to take everything you thought you just learned and put it on the shelf. And now we're going to take out the second story and just look at what the second story has to say. So the second story is a very different model of creation. And I think that's useful for me. Because, you know, some people sit down and they get a grand vision in their head, and they can just paint it the way that it looks in their head on a canvas. Me, I can't do that. When I'm trying to create something, I always mess it up. Creation for me is a process of trial and error. In every sermon, I spend 4 hours cutting. Because I want it to be clear and direct, but it doesn't start off that way. You probably wouldn't think that because I just get up here and I talk. So it probably doesn't seem like I organize it much at all. But I actually spend a lot of time trying to cut out the extra, right? To fix what went wrong the first time around. This week, I was trying to teach myself, I'm terrible with anything practical. This week, I was trying to make an origami dove. And, I keep the origami dove, but I threw away the 12 pieces of paper that I ruined in order to try to make the origami dove. And this is as good as it got, which is depressing, but this is as good as it got. But imagine I got actually a decent origami dove. I could take out the origami dove and be like, oh man, you're great. But that's not the way that creation happens for me. It doesn't happen right the first time. I try, and I change, and I try again. And for me, I'm tempted to toss away the ones that I don't like. Thank God, God is not like that. This is the story of Adam and Eve. So according to this story, God makes the heavens and the earth like spring up out of the field. It doesn't talk about him talking. It just says that it happened. The Lord God has a garden and no one to till it. So we start off in the beginning with a problem. In the last creation story, when did we get to a problem? Never, right? But this story begins with a problem. God made a garden, but oh shoot, I gotta have someone who tended the garden. So it says, then the Lord formed man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. So dust from the ground. So if you've ever been to like Ash Wednesday, we talk about ashes to ashes and dust to dust. This is what it's talking about. In the first creation story, God doesn't speak and say, let there be mankind. God reaches into the earth, the dust, earth, or in Hebrew, Adamah, and takes it up and forms it. And then it says that he breathes, once again, wind, breath, and spirit, all the same word, ruach, and breathes into his nostrils so that man has breath, has spirit, and life. Right? That's very different. Is that like, you see the difference, right? Like, and once again, when we started off with the image for this first story, like the first thing you said about the God is like, he speaks it into existence. Clearly, he has all power. He's omnipotent. But this is a guy who's just making stuff out of stuff, right? His breath is amazing. It brings life. It's miraculous. But it's not necessarily all powerful in the same way that it seemed like in the first story, especially because it starts off with a problem, right? So God made something and it wasn't good enough yet. So God made something in.
Why is it in the east?
The geography was recognizable to the light.
Sun rising? Or, okay.
I mean, that's a good question. So it doesn't say. So you could say metaphorically it's east because that's where the sun rises. But also, like, this is a story of a people who lived in a place. Like, it's weird because we read this story and we don't live in the place where life started. But the people who wrote, like, actually lived in the Fertile Crescent, right? I don't think that anybody thought they knew where Eden was. And they certainly didn't know all of the creeks and crevices. There's no maps, right? Over yonder, that's where did creation start? Where's the Garden of Eden? Oh, it's never that way, right? Interestingly enough, a lot of churches will put churches traditionally are facing east for the same reason, right? It's to the Holy Land. Traditionally, I don't know if we are. I don't have any sense of direction. But we'll actually talk about for those of you who grew up before 1970s, you might remember that altars used to be in the back of the wall. And when the priest performs the Eucharist facing the altar that's in the back of the wall, it's actually called an east-facing Eucharist, regardless of how the things are organized, because traditionally churches face east. By the way, that idea of having the altar against the wall is a very creation story number one kind of idea, right? God is great and out there. And the priest is just helping us lead our praises to this God who is great and out there. Which is great until you're lonely. But getting back to the second creation story. So God has a problem and then tries to solve the problem. It's trial and error, which is the way that I create most of the time. My guess is most of you. We have this like theme, this idea that people like the great creative people just like create things in their head and then make them in the world. But if you ever watch Bob Ross, is this guy who like had these painting classes, and he's like, "Oh, you make a mistake? That's fine. Just turn it into a happy little tree, right?" Like what improvisers would call yes and, right? Like a happy accident is something you can talk about. So I think what you'll find in this story is it's a lot more about happy accidents, right? That there's a problem and they try to solve it, and so God is creating through this back and forth thing. It seems much more human and much less like overarching and powerful than the first story. Okay. So God has a stream that would rise in the earth. The Lord or man from the dust. We talked about that, and breathed into him. And it's man. It actually says man. That's not. This is the same translation. So when it says man, it means man. It doesn't mean humanity. God created a man from the earth and breathed in his nostrils. And the Lord planted the garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man who he had formed. Out of the ground, God made to grow every tree. So once again, God is creating out of the earth, the autumn, the dust, the ground, both people and the stuff. And what is God? What is the purpose of the first man that God creates?
To
Tend the garden, right? That's their job, is to take care of the rest of creation. A river flows from the east to water the garden, where it divides and becomes 4 branches. So it's talking about actual geography. Once again, you have to assume that the people who are hearing this, like that these are actual places that they more or less had a sense of. Right? And many of these places are real places, like the river Euphrates. Assyria is a place that there was a country. It's a little north of what we think of as Syria. There's no Assyria anymore, but it was a big deal when this was written. Clearly, right? Took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to keep and till it. So there's this garden. Lord commanded man, you may freely eat of any tree in the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So apparently there's one tree, that's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You shall not eat, for in the day in which you eat of it, you will die. In the Hebrew, it's actually even stronger than that. It's the day you will eat of it, dying you will die. It's an expression, dead as a doornail, dead, all the way dead. So once again, if you were not let go of anything somebody might have taught you about the story, if you're Adam in this story, what do you think happens if you take a bite of that?
God.
You're dead immediately, fall dead, right? It's not some mystical death. It's not something like he's like, watch out, because then I'll kill you. I also want to point out that the good and evil is an idiom in Hebrew. So it doesn't necessarily mean what we would assume it means. So when we think of good and evil, we think of moral things, right? So you think it's the knowledge of moral things. But in Hebrew, good and evil is an idiom that just means comprehensive knowledge. So if I was to translate this into contemporary English, it's probably better because it's the knowledge from A to Z. It's knowledge of all things. It's not necessarily just moral knowledge that's being talked about when we talk about the knowledge of good and evil. That's why someone's brain. Sorry, I was getting some blank looks. But you know what I'm saying? It's a comprehensive knowledge, not necessarily just what's good and bad.
So if they eat of this tree, God is going to kill them, or they're going to die from eating this.
It doesn't make it clear, but it just says that seems like it's the immediate consequence, is that you'll fall over dead automatically, right? Then God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. So it seems like the man is lonely. So once again, we've got another problem that needs solving. If God created, it's not all working together. It's like, okay, a little while, so I'm going to change something up again. Once again, right? So it's not good that man should be alone. I'll make for him a helper as his partner. Okay? This passage historically has become the root of a lot of weirdness. So I want to point out something. So I think a lot of times when people have interpreted this historically, they thought helper as something diminutive. Like someone who's a helper or someone who's trying to help someone else is more important. But the word helper that's used in Hebrew here is only used in the rest of the Bible when it talks about how God helps humanity. So the helper word here is not necessarily a subservient help, right? In fact, if anything, it seems like it's an empowered help. So man needs a helper. Man, Adam, needs a helper. We haven't called him Adam yet, but that. Okay, so sorry, I got stuck. So out of the ground, God formed every animal. So Adam's lonely, so let's get him some companionship. Let's try with the animals. Doesn't seem to be working well enough, but he makes animals and they help a little bit, right? So every animal of the field, bird in the air, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature was its name. And the first story, how did everything that had a name get a name? Who gave them the name? And the second story, how did creatures of the earth get names? Adam gives them the name. So it's not even like God is just making the world and dropping his thing. God is making the world in some ways with Adam. Like he can't make a cow, but he gets to name the cow, right? There is like a cooperation between both God and this man and how he's building the world, right? What theologians will often call co-creating the world, which is a really fancy way of saying doing it together, right? But in this story of creation, it's part of Adam's role to make the world along with God, right? Which also sort of means like God doesn't have a plan that is completely separate from what Adam chooses. The man gives name to all cattle and birds of the air and the animals of the field, but the man has not found a helper as partner. He's still lonely and he still needs something else that a cow can't give him. So the Lord caused a deep sleep to fall on the man, and as he slept, he took one of his ribs and closed it up in the place of the flesh. And the rib that God had taken from the man and made woman and brought her to the man. In English, woman and man, like their two words are connected. Man, right? Same thing in Hebrew. It's ish and isha. So from ish was created isha. So woman and man. Man was made from the earth, and woman was made from man. Fun fact about language. Sorry, I hope this isn't too much like weird language stuff. Once again, in English, we do not have a gendered language the way other languages are gendered. In French, what is the word for this? Chaise, right? That's the word for chair. Is it a lady chair or a masculine chair?
It's a lady chair.
All chairs are lady chairs in French because all nouns have like le or like there is a gender to almost everything, right? When I was in French class, my French teacher, as a woman, would say, whenever we would accidentally put the wrong gender on the word problem, she would be like, "The problem, monsieur, is always masculine." I had a friend in the class that would say, "Yes, but the fault is always feminine," because in French the word fault is feminine. But the point is like, and if you give everything a gender, the genderness of the thing matters less, right? But to be aware, this is a gendered language in Hebrew, right? So earth is feminine, man is masculine, not surprising, and woman is feminine. So you have the masculine being made from the feminine, the man being made from the Adamah, the earth, which is feminine, and then the feminine being made from the masculine. So there's this like back and forth here that gets lost when we do it in English a lot because we don't have the genders to catch it. And I'm going to go ahead. We haven't gotten to this part yet, but once again, the man's name is Adam, right? What did I say the Hebrew word is for
Adamah.
Adamah? Adamah, literally, right? The Adam is made from the Adamah, right? And the Isha is made from the Ish, right? The man is made from the earth. The woman is made from the man. You see, there's sort of like a poetry to that, right?
The fact that he went into a deep sleep is sort of like surgery. They just put him out
Exactly.
to create her.
But also the fact is that God didn't have the raw ingredient. God in this story doesn't have the raw ingredients he needs to make a woman. Like in the other story, you can just say it and it would happen. But in this story, he's a little bit more fumbly. He needs to get the parts, right? And he doesn't always necessarily have the right ones. So he's got to make parts. He made a man, and he was lonely. Oh, shoot. Let's make a dog. That's nice. What he really needs is a woman. Okay, so for the kind of help that is, once again, not a subservient help, but something up higher, call it. And then he said, okay, and then the man said, this is at last bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman. You shall out of man each is one was taken. Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. So this passage is talking about where did marriage go, right? I'll point out, like, in the creation stories, it's not necessarily, like, people have started to treat it like it's prescriptive when it's actually descriptive. So the creation stories exist to describe the way the world is, not necessarily to describe the way the world should be. It's just the way the world is. So sometimes this passage has been used, like, if you have a belief in that traditional marriage is heterosexual marriage and that's only, then you can have that belief. But it's not necessarily come out of this passage, right? A lot of times we use this passage, but this passage is designed to explain the way things are, not to say, like, this is the way it needs to be. It's sort of shifting, like, that's not how it's written. It's written to be like, over there, over yonder is where we came from. Okay. So now, so then we go to chapter 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than other wild animals. We get to know the serpent. And so the serpent starts talking to the woman and trying to convince her that she should try to eat of the apple. Some people will say that this serpent is the devil. Does it say that in this passage? No, right? Which isn't to say that you can't read it that way, but there's nothing in this story to indicate that the serpent is anything other than a serpent. Right? Okay, so okay, and then the woman Eve thinks about it, and she decides that she's going to eat the apple for reasons. It's good to eat, it's pretty, and it will give her knowledge, right? So she thinks about it and decides not to do what God said, not to eat it, but rather whatever. And it seems like this idea that you might become like God is a threat to God or something. Because that's what happens when you eat of the knowledge, right? When you get the knowledge of God. So she and the man ate the fruit. It said. So you will see in Christian art there are so many paintings of Eve and her apple. Like, oh yeah, I tried this apple. But in the story, that doesn't exist. In the story, it's more like, hey, Adam, have a snack, right? Like, or not even. Like, he's just going along with it. Like, the whole temptation narrative is not actually in the Bible text. Other than later, Adam makes a sort of lame plea to that, but it doesn't say that. So, so then they both eat. They realize they're naked. And they sew fig leaves for themselves to make loincloths to hide their nakedness. They also then hide from God. And God seems to not know where they are. Right?
Do that number 8 again. They heard the sound of God.
They heard the sound of the Lord walking.
Hear him walking.
Now, in the first story, do we like imagine God is like walking around and making noise? No.
No.
But in this story, if God's walking, kind of think of him as like a dude,
Yeah.
right? That makes noise. Like that's kind of like it's a different way of thinking about it. It's a very human vision of God, right? Whereas the first story was all God's all powerful all the time. The second story is much more like God is pretty much like any other dude you know, except for maybe more important. And then the man and the wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord among the trees of the garden. So at very least, the man and the woman think that they can actually hide from God in that whole world. Like God doesn't God doesn't seem omniscient, all-knowing in this story, right? But the Lord called the man and said to him, "Where are you?" Once again, why would he ask, "Where are you?" if he knows, right? He seems to actually not know. He said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." That's what Adam says. Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten of the tree of which I commanded you not to eat? So it seems like God is putting together this idea that they ate in the tree of confidence. Then the man said, "The woman who you gave me to be with you, she is the fruit of the tree and I ate it." That's where we get the whole temptation narrative. And then God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" "Is the serpent? He tricked me and I ate it." The Lord God said to the serpent, and then you have this series of curses, which is interesting. And once again, this is descriptive. It's there to try to explain to us why the world is the way it is. So it says, "Because you have done this," he's talking to the serpent, "cursed are you among the animals and among wild creatures. And you will go upon your belly you will go, and dust you shall eat all the rest of all the days of your life." So it seems like until now, serpents walked upright. Right? This is to explain why serpents crawl. Okay. And I will put enmity between you and the woman. This is why women don't like snakes, apparently. I'll put enmity between you and the woman, and between you and your offspring and hers. And he will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. So he's cursed this serpent both in his relationship to the woman and his relationship to other creatures in the earth itself, right? The earth itself being what he was made from. Right? Okay, and then to the woman he says, "I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing." And like we get a boo from the crowd. "In pain you shall bring forth children, and yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you."
Oh.
Okay, so that might be a little difficult, but I want to point out a couple of things. We're gonna see more that the curses are happening to what the things were created from. What was God created? What was Eve created from? Adam, and so she's being cursed in her relationship with what she came from, her husband. Then it says, so look at what the way that Adam gets cursed, and because he said to the man, he said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree which about I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you." Why would the ground be cursed because of Adam? Because Adam came from the earth. It's in his relationship to the thing he was made from. "And you shall toil, and in toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it will bring forth from you, and you shall eat of the plants in the field. So he's explaining to him why this is why farming is hard, right? Like, because we've been cursed in our relationship with the earth because of the break that we have with God, or because of the consequences of whatever eating the fruit, which is less than what we would expect. What do we expect in the story to happen as soon as they took a bite? Them to die, right? So it's important to realize the curse is actually merciful relative to what the expectation is going to be. There's a great scholar of the Old Testament named Brueggemann, and he always says that there's never a word of judgment without also a word of mercy. And I think that's something that gets lost in the way that Christians often carry it. But it's true. Or at least not think it is. The sweat of your face, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread until you are returned to the ground. For out of it you were taken, you are dust, and to dust you shall return. If you ever come on Ash Wednesday, this is where it comes from. Right. Once again, it's like in relationship to that which we were created. This story is very relational. Our relationship to the earth, Eve's relationship to Adam, the serpent's relationship to both Eve and the rest of the the man named his wife Eve because she was the mother of all who lived. And the Lord made garments and skins for the man and his wife and clothed them. That's an interesting act of mercy, right? They were naked and they didn't know about it, but once they ate, they realized that they were naked and they were ashamed. And so God made them clothing.
I didn't know that.
The wages of sin is death.
So some animals die.
So some animals died because of their sin.
That's an interesting pitch. Yeah, maybe. When they say wages of sin is death, I think that's meant to be a more broadly, theological term, like this is how death came in. But you could see it as like the animals were the sacrifice that saved them, or if wanted to. But the thing that I sort of want to, I want to make sure you take other things. The thing I want to make sure you take is that this is an act of mercy, right?
It is.
They're going to have to live outside the Garden of Eden, and God makes sure that they have clothes to be able to make it.
Right.
I thought they
Big
clothed themselves. I didn't know God did.
Earlier in the passage, it said they used fig leaves to clothe themselves, right? Which apparently were not fashionable.
These are skins, right?
So apparently God is more fabulous, whatever. But and gives them actual clothes that they're going to be able to withstand. And then God said, "See, the man is like one of us." Once again, humanity becomes like us because they eat of because they know things now. It's weird. Sometimes you learn things and you can't unlearn them. And you carry it with you. In a big sense, to me at least, this is what the story is getting at. Adam and Eve learned something. In the same way that as we grow up, we learn things that we don't want to know. Right? And then you carry it with you. Okay, so we're going to do that. And now he might reach out his hand. There's talking about Adam. Now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. So, so he knows this painful thing, and if he eats of the tree of life, he's going to have to live with that forever. Interestingly enough, God never said, "Don't eat from the tree of life."
No.
It's just once we've eaten from the tree of knowledge that all of a sudden eating from the tree of life, living forever, becomes a problem. Because we have to live with this knowledge that damns us from the inside.
You know, I've been told in the past that the tree of life is an allegory, I guess, of Jesus Christ. Yeah,
That's one way of reading it. So it's that's a different way of approaching the scripture than we're doing in class, which isn't to say it's a wrong one, right? But in this class, I told you we're trying to read the stories for just what these stories say.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But there's other ways of approaching the Bible where you're like a convergent approach to the Bible might be like, okay, what is there in the New Testament? How do we see the things in the Old Testament that tell us what's going to come in the New Testament, right? Which is, once again, it's a legitimate way of reading it. And in Revelation, there is Jesus and there is a tree of life, and we get to eat of it just fine, right? So, okay. And then he drove them out of the garden and placed a cherubim with a flaming sword to guard the way. Okay, so that's basically the story. I'm going to run through the factual questions real quick to make sure that we've got the grounding. After the heavens and earth, the first thing God makes is, sorry, I was going to say that after heavens and earth, the first thing God makes is earth. That's not true. Man, I guess, God makes the first human out of what?
Dust.
And breath, right? We are both earth and the breath of God, spirit and dirt. For a long time, I thought about dirt in a very negative way, and then I realized that's where all of this stuff comes from. Because the vegetables, yuck. But it's meaningful. In our story of creation, humans were made. In the other story of creation, human beings were made after what?
After
Yes, and particularly animals. Right? But in this story, when do the animals come? After Adam. Adam's got to be there to give them names, right? So once again, this is just if you were wondering, is there really two different stories? Well, it's just different order, right? Two, Adamah is the Hebrew word for dirt, which is grammatically feminine. I talked about this earlier. That is related to the proper name Adam. His job is to tend the garden. He's very connected to where creation comes from. God makes the woman because the man's lonely. And the other story, God was always right from the beginning of this story. Something was wrong, right, in the fixing. And God tries to fix Adam's loneliness by making animals. That doesn't work, so he goes on and trying other things. Once again, trial and error is the key of creation in this second story. Animals are made by God, and they get their names from Adam. Therefore, they're working together. God is looking to make Adam a helper. Once again, helper is not a diminutive. The word in Hebrew is for woman is Isha, and man is Ish. The woman in the story is made from man. From earth, first earth, then Adam, then Eve, right? Out of things made from each other. Marriage is explained in verse 2:24. The knowledge of good and evil isn't just about a moral knowledge, but about a comprehensive knowledge. Based on what God said, we expect that when they eat the fruit, they will die immediately. 11, true or false? We meet the devil who is clearly identified in the story. False, right? You might read into it that way, but once again, you'd be reading into it. The serpent tells them that if they eat the fruit, they will be like God, right? Because they'll know stuff, right? Eve has reason. So that's the temptation, right? Is that we become more like God. Eve has reasons for eating the fruit. It's edible, pretty, and makes what people smart. True or false? Eve has to tempt Adam to eat the fruit. It doesn't even say she offered it. It's just he ate along for the ride. Okay, great. Okay. The creation story, the last creation story made God seem almost like a cosmic force. This story makes God seem more
Like a man.
human. Mm-hmm. True or false? God asks Adam where he is. The natural conclusion of that is that God doesn't know where Adam is. True, I think, right? Yeah. And I wrote the question, so hopefully I've got the right answer. Once they ate of the fruit, they immediately realized they were naked. The serpent the serpent was cursed in his relationship to woman and to animals. The woman was cursed in her relationship to man, and was created. The man was cursed in his relationship to earth, from which created them. God exiled Adam because he was now like God, and because he didn't want him to eat of the tree of life. God showed mercy by giving clothes for Adam and Eve. Okay, these next questions I'm going to go through with a group because it seems like you guys are more interested in big group than you are in a small group. But these are discussion questions. So the last questions were factual. These are questions for a matter of interpretation, right? So there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. One, would it be fair to say that this story is a lot more messier than the first one?
Yes.
In the first story, God was all-knowing, all-powerful, and ordered. How does that match up with this story?
This one he's searching, walking, he's.
Making do.
Yeah.
Figuring out what's next. Making his way, right? So if this story is your natural story, when you walked in, you probably didn't notice the flowers at all. Like this guy. So it's really good. We have both of us, right? What adjectives would you ascribe to God and the character of this?
More human-like, more like us.
Merciful.
Human, merciful, right? Not necessarily as powerful, but not as powerful.
He's not angry.
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways of reading that into the story or not. But one of the things that I would point out about God in the story is he's much more collaborative, right? Like it's not God doing it and it happens to us. Adam gets to name the animals, like they're working together. God's working together with human beings, and with all of us. What do you think about the roles of men and women in this story?
Sad.
Tell me more about that. Why is it that?
We appear to be the bad guys.
Okay, so that's definitely the way that the story's been taught. But I think one of the things you might pick up from the way I'm teaching it is a lot of the things we sort of assume when we filled in some of the gaps, actually the stuff has been used against women over time, right? Like Eve tempted Adam. Did that happen? No. It's his lame excuse. For some reason, you believe it. Similarly, it seems like woman is made from man, which has been led to, or helper is seen as diminutive, but it's not. Helper is the same with God helps, right? Like, and woman is made from man, the same with man is made from the earth. It's not necessarily being diminutive. It's not like we think of the earth as better. Like, it's not like we think of dirt as better than humanity, right? Why would you think of man as better than woman, right? If you understand the nature of the story. So part of what I want to help you guys do is figure out like what is culture layered over top of this story, narration, which is what is true to the story itself, right? So it seems like, I mean, I'm not saying it's women's lib, though I do know a pastor who once preached on this story, and the title of the story was From Adam's Rib to Women's Lib. But actually, a lot of the ways this story has been taught and used about gender roles is not actually the story. Or doesn't really come from the story, but something we add to it, right? Which is, once again, me saying, like, you can make your own mind about gender roles, but it's my sort of job to be like, does that really come from the Bible, or does that come from what we painted on top of the Bible? Because I want you to have a relationship. You already have a relationship with culture, but I want you to have a relationship with the Bible separate. Okay. This is this is a tough question. Did the serpent ever tell a lie?
No,
Told half truth.
Maybe, right? He said, it'll make you smarter, it'll make you like God. That was true. Did God ever say anything that seems untrue?
heavens, no.
What about anyone want to challenge this thing? God says, eat the fruit and you'll die. Do they?
No.
They eat the
Eventually
fruit.
they do.
But they don't die, at least not run away.
Right.
So at the very least, they're feeding. Yeah.
God said that. Was he talking about the tree of life or the tree of knowledge of good?
The tree of knowledge of good. That's pretty good.
They could eat from the tree of life.
They just don't get around to it. If only they had first.
They should have.
And then it actually asks the question, are there things that are worse than lies? Which is for your own interpretation. But that's one of the things I think is interesting, right? Like the serpent is able to really hurt these people by telling them the truth. And God is more merciful than he makes it sound. They ate the fruit of knowledge that they stole so that they could never go back. Are there things that we learn from life that forever changes? We sort of talked about. Does this story teach us anything about shame? I would say yes, right? Like that's where shame is the first fruit of a broken relationship with God. As soon as they eat the apple, what do they realize? They realize they're naked and they think it's bad.
See,
Until then, there is no shame.
Yeah.
Shame is the first consequence. Like this belief that I am bad. They're not bad. They're made by God. But they believe they're bad immediately as soon as their relationship with God is broken. Okay. Why might it be bad for humans to eat of the tree of life? We talked about like living with being stuck with the knowledge for eternity. Are there situations in your life in this story that would be particularly helpful, right? So when you're trying to make sense, like for me, ironically, the first story is about a day at a time, but when I'm trying to live my life a day at a time, I'm probably going back to this story, right? Things get messed up, but they also can get fixed, right? God is working with you, you're not just a victim of God's work, right? That you're in this process and it's fumbling, but there is also and like you make mistakes and there's consequence, but then there's also mercy. When you look at the world and you realize it's messed up, this story at least gives me a little bit for how that might have happened, right? Why do I get hooked up on this idea that I'm a terrible person? Why do I get hooked on shame? It's the fruit of a broken relationship with God. Yes? No? Yes. Okay, sorry. Are there times in your life when you find this story unhelpful? Right. And really, the times that I need God to be in control, right? And what does this story teach us about evil and bad stuff? That it exists, and it came from someone. It came from a broken relationship with God. So it's not like God created evil. This is something that's actually I think this is really key for Christian understanding. Because other religions have influenced the way that we look over the history and have led us to believe that evil is a natural force of the world. But Christian theology doesn't teach that. Evil is when good things become corrupted. Evil is when good things start falling apart. That's the way, evil doesn't, classically in Christian theology and thought, evil actually doesn't exist. It's the lack of existence. It's as the things that God created sort of fall apart. For the scientists in the room, a positive charge only exists as the absence of an electron. And yet, a positive charge can kill you because it'll zap you, right? Being out of balance itself is the potentially destructive force. But being out of balance is that, but no one created a positive charge. It's just that there should be an electron there and there's not. That's the way evil happens in Christian theology. God doesn't make evil. In the beginning, there isn't good and evil. There isn't this great struggle between good and evil that is forever. All that stuff comes in later when a different religion called Zoroastrianism starts having a lot of influence in the way that we look at Christianity. But these stories say, in the beginning, it was good. Maybe not perfect, but good. And then it got better. And then it got a little weird, right? But we're still making our way back to relationship with God again. And in that context, if you look to Revelation, that sort of explains how this second story of creation comes to completion throughout all of history. That was one of my last classes. Great. Any thoughts or questions on the second, or comments on the second creation story?
I'll tell you, there are some funny things, like the serpent says, did God say you should not eat from any tree in the garden? So here he's kind of making a little sneaky, whatever, insinuation there, which God did not say. And then the woman says, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it. Which is not true. He did not say that. He didn't say you cannot touch the tree.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't even catch that detail.
Yeah.
But it's interesting too, because a lot of times we treat things as toxic. We make the rules that God gives us harder.
Was with Adam when this whole talk happened?
See, and that's the other thing.
Or was that secondhand Adam?
Adam would have been next to him.
Yeah, Adam messed it all up. It's his fault. Right? But and part of what I want to get at is like the part of the story like leads us to like try to be like whose fault is it? And so that's a good question. Go ahead and dig into the story. See and try to see what difference does it make to you if one is true or the other.
What else is interesting in all the pictures you see? It's always an apple. And from what I've read, it's probably a pomegranate because that was more common in their area at that time.
I mean, I also think that the author didn't care.
No, I don't think so either.
Well, no, but I mean, like, I want to, like, and this is something that's interesting, right? Like, a lot of times the biblical story, you get the biblical story, and we try to, like, what was it really? But you don't ever want to lose that to the author, it doesn't matter, it's just fruit, right?
And to the artists that are drawing, painting, or making these, they're just an apple's thing because that's what they're used to. That's
Same reason they make Jesus white.
right, exactly.
It's what they're used to. I don't feel the need to go in deep review because I think you guys followed pretty well. But the big brush stuff. First story, God is very omnipotent, orderly, and in control. The second story is God is much more collaborative and adaptive, right? And human beings have a complicated relationship, and it actually sort of gets to like something eventually good. Okay, so just going through the discussion questions. In the first story, we see God as all powerful, all knowing, and order. Is God like that? He forms creation. That creation is very good. How does that fit with the world you see? There sounded like a knowing laughter. I would encourage you to put that into words.
My stories are really good. I mean, yeah, there's some yuckiness in the second one, but they're still very good. They probably could be here.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying there's no. I'm just saying, like, how does this story? How does the first story compare to the world you see?
I see messiness everywhere.
You see messiness everywhere, so it might be difficult for you to see a connection between the first story, just between the first story, and the world you see.
I've linked them like this is how it was made. This is what happened.
Okay.
That's how I.
But there seems to be something missing in the first story. It's like how we got here. Okay. Second story shows God to be relatable, focused on relationships. and in our world is both evolving and broken. Does that fit with how you see God? Does that fit with how you see the world?
Yes, that's a comfortable thought, a comfortable, the man you can talk to, just when you're driving your car, yeah,
Not just look up there and go, ooh.
yeah. And the all of all of it is.
Once I was teaching these stories to a group, and when they finished the first story, they literally said they were unsatisfied. Then we read the second story, and they literally said they were unsatisfied with it too, and started being like, "Let's go back to the first story." What do you think about the fact that they had that experience? What does that say about the Bible, and what does that say about our groups?
What I love about the Bible is that the Jewish people show you all the good and all the bad, warts and all. You see Moses for what he was. He was a prince, then he was a murderer, and then he was a leader. So you see all of that. So you get the good and the bad. You get to see it all for what it's worth. I would rather be completely transparent than half the truth.
So you get depth of character and not just white hats and black hats.
Yeah.
In the Bible, yeah.
And in my first student, all that I think is still here, we just have to look for it and find it.
There still is there's still so much beauty in creation. And, and in fact, like the practice of rest and Sabbath is designed to bring us back to the truth that is in that story, right? Or that is sort of profoundly and uniquely expressed in that story. So, what you might be getting at is, I think both of the stories say some really important things about what it means to be human and about what it means to be in relationship with the God that I meet, right? And if I had just one of them, I don't think I would have as good of an understanding of my relationship with God or the reality of what it means to be human as if I only had one, right? So I guess what I'm getting at is that I think that there's a value to having two stories, right? And I also think that there are two stories in the beginning of the Bible tells us something about how we should look at the rest of it, right? Like the very beginning, you have two contradicting stories in the very beginning. That tells me that the Bible is not trying to the point of the Bible is not to set the record straight on the facts. Remember, in French, the word for history is the same word for story, and two different stories can live next to each other. And in fact, that's the way that the Bible was read and interacted for thousands of years. It wasn't until the Enlightenment that we decided all of a sudden history should be one list of correct facts, right? So it's not until the 1500s that the idea that there's contradictions might be problematic, because these stories were more about how we learn to be human and learn what it meant to be human and learn to be in love with God than they were necessarily about teaching a factual history. One of the things they teach in seminary that very few pastors ever repeat.
Oh dear.
Is
I want to know.
What is it? What is it?
behind the curtain, right? A myth is a story that never happened but is always true.
Say that again.
A myth is a story that never happened but is always true. So let me give you an example of another myth. George Washington cut down the cherry tree and said, "I cannot tell a lie, I cut down the cherry tree." Apparently, historians will tell you that never happened. But is it true? Yes, because honesty matters, and it's at the core of the American experience, right? Or the best of the American experience, at least, right? So the people who are writing these stories were not trying to give a scientific history of the world. They were trying to explain what it means to live in it, right? And for what it's worth, I think they did a much better job in terms of they did a better job of what they were trying to do, right? You know, I believe that evolution happened, and every priest I know does. But so many congregants I know get super squeamish. But it's because every priest I know went to seminary, and in seminary we said there's two different creation stories. So if there's room for two different creation stories, of course there's room for another factual history, right? That contradiction that many people felt like that they were stuck in the middle of is actually not one at all. If you take the Bible on the Bible's terms. But if you need to make the Bible into what you want it to believe, then it can be a huge problem, right? Is what I'm sort of getting at. And in fact, this is a big deal, especially when you read the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible. Because what the consensus of biblical scholars, what everybody learns in seminary, is a theory they call the documentary hypothesis, which says that in history they had different versions of these stories that are in the Old Testament that were written at different times, may have started from the same oral traditions sometimes maybe even not. We have these different versions. And and at some point, we think because of the specific calamity, at some point, they came back together and they tried to catalog all the different stories. And when they did, they put them all in a book. But this is before people invented things like title pages. By the way, Genesis is not, there's no, in the original scrolls, there's no Genesis in big font and then everything else in small font. Genesis means in the beginning, which is the first line of the book. Because the first line of the book was the title, because there was no big title. Because paper was expensive, so you never made big print, right? Likewise, there was no capital or lowercase letters when they wrote these things. That hadn't been invented yet. There was no punctuation. They hadn't invented that yet. Or spaces between words. They hadn't invented that yet. Think about how hard it is to read. Yes, you wonder why so many people were illiterate. It's because literacy was in its infancy, right? When a lot of these things were written. This is so far away from our experience of what written things are versus spoken things, right? But at some point, they took together all the copies they had, and once again, they're copies that were copied by hand by somebody else through time, because there's no photocopiers and there's no the Bible. It's an amazing amount of human labor to keep these sacred stories together, and I think that it's invaluable for us. But also, it seems like at some point they said, okay, we're gonna have these. So what I was getting at with the documentary hypothesis, the idea is that there's these different sources that were put together and into a book, but they sort of cut and paste from different places and didn't necessarily explain when you went from one to another, right? Which is consistent with what we've seen today, right? In the middle of a verse, there's a cutoff, right? By the way, the chapters and verses were not written by the authors. That has to do with where it landed on the page when they first were trying to do it. There's a lot of things that we assume that are intentional about the way the Bible's put together that weren't necessary, right? Because once again, they were just copying it down, word for word, letter by letter. Or actually, letter by letter, because you didn't have spaces between words. You had to figure out from context when the word started, and when one word started, and the next one stopped. Right? So, So in the Pentateuch, in the first five books of the Bible, you basically have these, you're going back and forth between different narrators, and it doesn't necessarily mark it. Imagine if Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John were mashed up together, right? There's a real value to having them each separately. You can compare them. You can go, oh, this is what Matthew, and we can sort of see the fault lines for where it changes. And the theology is different between the different writers, right? The theology is different for the second story than the first story. What does the character of God look like? That's just a fancy way, that's just a basic way of saying, what is your theology? So you have in the Bible this, especially in the Old Testament, these like going back and forth. So when people sit down and read it, it becomes very difficult. I had a member of my congregation back in Texas, and she told me that she read the whole Bible straight through in a year. And I asked her how that was. And she said, well, when it wasn't awful, it was okay. And you know, it's funny because I have so many people that like, because when people talk about it, they're always like, I should read the Bible straight through. Very few people have. Some people can do it, and they're the kind of people that can watch a Wes Anderson movie.
I can probably watch them.
I'm gonna tell Becky you said that.
Yeah, if she didn't. Because you got to kind of be along, as if you're just along for the ride. But if you're trying to figure out how it works, it's not going to make sense to you until you have some of these tools, right? But then when you start having these tools, it starts coming alive, right? And this is just, and so what happens is the narrator from the second story comes up again, and the narrator from the first story comes up again. Most scholars think that there's 4 different traditions that are represented in the Pentateuch. But they argue a lot of times. But there's 2 clear voices, and these are the 2. And so when you get to Noah, and one of them tells you there's a dove that goes out to find a sprig to let them know that they can open it, that the waters are seated. And then you keep reading and you find out, wait, it's a raven, right? But you see cues that come back to these same traditions, right? So, so this is why, if you just read the Bible, you have to be aware that the Bible is just constructed differently than the way we construct things, the way we construct literature now. You know. And so if you want to have a relationship with the Bible, you have to kind of do it on its own terms, and not necessarily on the terms of either what we're used to or what we want it to be. I guess what I'm encouraging is the kind of openness that lets the Bible be enough as it is, rather than trying to make it fit into what I think I need, which is a handbook. But maybe God knows better than I do about what I need. Okay, so, okay. At some point, someone made the decision to put 2 very different stories right next to each other. If the Bible is divinely inspired, so was that decision. Oh man, I didn't even remember writing that. That's what. Why might it make sense to do that? That gets back to the idea that there's too much truth for one story, right? Okay, then 5. Often I, less, am surprised at how many faithful Christians have no idea that there are 2 creation stories in the Bible. 2/3 of you can bear me up on the fact that you hadn't heard that, right? So why do you think pastors don't teach this? Is it uncomfortable? And if so, why?
I think it's difficult to teach because you really have to get into the nuts and bolts of it. You have to have, yeah, it's complex. You have to, have had some time and thought into what you're getting ready to speak about. You have to put a lot of effort into it. Kind of like when we do a Bible study, just can't do it willy-nilly. Well, you can, but people will know you did it willy-nilly. But if you want it to be done right, you've got to take some time and earnestly. A lot of people don't want to put time into it.
Or they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, is it uncomfortable? Should it be uncomfortable? Are you uncomfortable?
No.
Did I make a mistake? Should I follow should I do what other pastors do and like conveniently avoid the topic, right? Like,
It's
I mean, I don't know. You tell me.
Dan?
Dan was,
No, I was gonna say, that it's uncomfortable if you're told this is a historic document, this is letter by letter, word for word what happened. How can this be what happened? There's two completely different stories. Your explanation, I think, is a huge comfort to me. It's not supposed to be a historic document. It's not the movie of how it all began. This is teaching you how to live. And that's all.
And there are some sections of the Bible that are more historic, that are trying to keep, and they're the ones that you don't bother reading.
Because they're boring.
Because they're boring, because it's just fact. But yeah.
So
I mean, because the Bible is, because here's the other thing, it's like we treat the Bible as if it's a book, but it's only a book because the church said this is the anthology of books. Like, it is a bunch of different books from different times, written by different authors, and different, like, and once again, that is not edgy. Like, we all know.
But we see this as just an interpretation. We're gonna read it, we're gonna take from it what suits. But there are those folks that see it literally. And there is no, we just deal with it.
I
found
mean-
that uncomfortable.
Huh?
I found that uncomfortable
Right.
throughout my life. I
Yeah.
couldn't reconcile. That's not what I see in life. And they're telling me this is.
Or even on the page.
This-
Yeah, but it's not even not what you see in life, it's not what you see on the page. Is my sort of thing. But, I mean, you know, everybody's gonna have a different relationship with the Bible, and everybody's gonna see different things out of it. And I think that that's actually really good. And we come together as a community to try to learn it more deeply. You know, for me, I'm mystified how you could get to the Bible. The world was made the way the Bible said so, from these two different stories. Like, I'm mystified, which makes me curious. What is the human need that leads us to come to that conclusion when it's different from what God has handed us? Right? Like, I have compassion for that, right? And I think that part of it, like when I first started teaching this, I never would have said something like what I really want as a handbook, because I wasn't willing to say that. But I've been knocked around enough by life that I can admit that now. That, like, I wanted something different than what is. But that's part of letting go of the thing that isn't right for you, or isn't right. Yeah, I think it's difficult because, once again, you're trying to bring together a whole bunch of people that are having different experiences and put a lot, and it's meaningful stuff, right? And because it's meaningful, it can be very uncomfortable. The best things in life are awkward, right? But they are also the best things in life. I mean, shame, relationship, creation, creativity. Like, what does it mean to be children of God? What does it mean to be in God's image? Do I get to be in God's image and you don't? Do you get to be in God's image and I don't? These are the questions. These are the things that are brought up by these texts. And wrestling with them makes us stronger spiritually, I believe. Right? But knowing them doesn't. Wrestling with them does. By the way, the word Israel means someone who, the name Israel means someone who has striven or wrestled with God. Right? Like, that is the name of our people.
Say that again.
Israel. The name Israel means someone who has striven or wrestled with God. It's Jacob gets that name after he wrestles with the angel all night long. Right. Respond to the statement. Revering the Bible is worthless unless you are willing to know it for what it really is, and not just what you want it to be.
You know, I said this earlier to some of the men, is that the Bible has everything in it that I need for salvation.
That's the position of the Episcopal Church. All things necessary for salvation are contained in the S. Which isn't to say that everything in it is necessary for salvation, but all the things you need for salvation are found.
You know, and I don't believe, you know, like the creation story in the Bible and different theories of creation to include Big Bang and evolution are mutually exclusive.
I agree with that.
So I believe that God is so great that he could have made a Big Bang,
A Big Bang.
and set everything in motion for evolution, whatever to take care of. But when I die and go to heaven, I'll ask. That's when I'll say, I believe.
And we're not gonna know everything. We're not gonna know anything really. I mean, we thinking about, you know, a friend of mine's son died very unexpectedly this week. And we don't know what tomorrow, Johnny, is going to bring us. We don't know what death is going to. We don't know any of that till we get there. So why not just
Do the next right
live
thing.
in what we know, right?
Do the next right thing. That's a very creation story too, right? I'm not going to take us through all of it because we're also aware of the time, but I have just two more things. One, I put in a quote from Rachel Held Evans, which I like. She's a Christian author. I think that people treat the Bible like it's a conversation ender, but I believe that it's meant to be a conversation starter, not a conversation ender. And I hope that that's something that, like, when you start to look at these stories of creation, you begin to see it that way, right? That it's not like this is what the Bible said, it's over, but rather like these are the things the Bible has me think about and figure out how to live from day to day. And then I'm not going to make you guys answer this today, but I want to encourage you to take question 10 home with you. Finish the statement. The Bible to me is blank. Right? Like, how is it that, what does the Bible mean to you? You probably picked up in the beginning when I talked about the Bible as the deepest well of human meaning. That's one of the things I talk about, right? I also think that its inconsistencies reveal its beauty. And in so doing, reveal both my brokenness.
So do you not see it as a handbook, a manual?
I mean, how do you?
That's, I think, what we're taught early.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, like, there's parts of it that are handbooky. Proverbs is pretty handbooky, but Psalms is poetry. Genesis is origin story. You know, like, the Bible's a lot more than just one thing. And thank God, like, I want a handbook, but here's the other thing. If I had a handbook, I wouldn't read it, because I don't. I never read the instructions for anything. Right? Why? Because they're boring, right? So I'm more like figuring out it. So I mean, so the other thing is, like, no one reads handbooks for the beauty of it. But I want you to read the Bible for the beauty of it. So, I mean, I'm not saying that the Bible doesn't teach you what it means to live in this world, but it's the process of working through the Bible that does it. It's more, the Bible works more like parable than it does like directions.
That's a good thing. The Bible is a process.
Well, our relationship with God is a process. The Bible is like, the way I think about it is the Bible is like the CrossFit gym.
The what?
The CrossFit gym.
Oh.
Like, the Bible is the gym, the weights and the whatever. But the relationship with God is the health, right? So the weights don't have to be perfect; they just have to be heavy, right? And you got to be careful to lift them some ways, or you might strain your back, right? Like, that's what the Bible is to me. I guess is one. It is the way in which we build up our spiritual strength and health, which is rooted in our relationship with God. But you make up your own metaphors. Okay, great. Thank you all for coming. I'm in awe and wonder that you guys decided to spend the Saturday with me on this. I love doing it. So if this was good for you, please let me know.
What are we doing
Let me know
next?
if there's Well, what I was saying is, I would encourage you guys to bring me topics, because I could just schedule one on Jonah or any number of things, and that's great. But I find that the first one of these I did was the one on Revelation, which I never would have picked unless somebody asked me, right? So, if think about the things you're curious about, and let me know, because that helps me come up with the next one. But there's like, I've got ones in my back pocket, right? But part of me feels like it's more meaningful when it's what you guys ask for. But thank you so much for your time. Yeah.